Welcome to Rethink Gaming's Think, Rethink, Play podcast with Bob McDowell and Jerry Perkle.
And today's topic, how to win D&D by metagaming.
Winning! If you want to support this content, please consider joining us on Patreon. Subscribers get a special role on the Discord server, access to all of our content, and a chance for seats at our subscriber only tables.
And speaking of Patreon, we had a new hero join us on Patreon, JT. He's played in 2 of our online games so far, and he's an all-around okay guy. He's not too
That's
bad. What
right.
do you think?
He's great.
Yeah,
He's currently playing Tillman on our Rime of the Frostmaiden campaign.
he's a little hairy man in Sigur's point of view. Also, as a part of our legend here, I will write a bardic poem, limerick, or tale of your deeds. And I just delivered the first limerick today to Brian.
Nice, nice. Not every Patreon is going to send you limericks. Just remember that.
Yep.
I'm going to put out a big heartfelt thank you to all of our patrons, each and every one of you guys. Your contributions go straight into helping us run great games and create awesome content, and we couldn't do it without you.
Thanks, guys. So, what we're really talking about today is, I guess, metagaming, right?
That's right. And again, this is another one of those I really want to dive into because it's just not in the modern books. But before we get to that, let's do our introductions.
Who are you?
Well, I'm Bob. I'm a long term dungeon master, student of the art, and what I love most is teaching the game to others.
And I'm Jerry, Bob's co-conspirator at Rethink Gaming. I write content mostly for DM's Guild, and I am a house DM at RPG Dungeons in Carrollton, Texas.
And a damn fine DM, you should go to one of his games. So today's main theme is metagaming, and I frame metagaming as behaving as though you know you are playing a game. We're going to get into what that all means.
Okay, so to kind of put that a different way, you're using your out of character knowledge to inform your in character actions or decisions,
Yes.
more or less. Okay.
One of the earliest experiences I had with just metagaming in general. Um, Years ago, I was in college. I was experimenting with new things, as you do. You know, you're currently in college, right?
Yeah.
I had a game, fantasy setting, and I decided we're not going to count currency. Now you got to remember, this was a while ago, and I had just come out of a version of D&D where you leveled up by coins. So I thought it was really kind of novel to say, I don't care how much money you currently have. Just assume I gave you however much money you need to buy whatever reasonable thing it is that you think you want, and you have that much money. We're just not going to count it. So my players would say, hey, I'm going to run by this and I'm going to go get that. And it's like, okay, write it down, write it down, write it down. The rule then was always whatever's on your character sheet you have. This party encountered its first invisible monster. It was a naga. And they attempted to fight it in a couple of different ways, trying to come up with some way to hit it. That particular system made invisible creatures super hard to hit. And suddenly one of my players says, okay, I pull out my bag of flour and scatter it all over the area. Well, I immediately thought, why would your character, a valiant warrior of the whatever, be carrying around baking supplies, right? Just ground the whole game to a halt. I went over, inspected the character sheet, saw hastily scrawled at the bottom in fresh pencil bag of flour. And I think that was the first time it just sort of clicked in my brain. This guy's trying to win D&D. You ever seen anything like that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there could be a perfectly good explanation. The guy could be a closet baker, you know.
Right?
um, some people aren't very proud of that hobby, but hey, you do you.
Yeah.
It's not
Um,
bad.
no, I don't think he was. I think he would have been quite embarrassed. I think he would be embarrassed to hear still in the story today. But anyway,
Sure. Um. So yeah, I guess kind of in addition to that, just trying to win and metagaming that way. Player knowledge also can impact metagaming, right?
right?
So I mean, just a random example. Jerry, the player, knows that vampires don't have reflections, but my character, Gordo the pie maker, also a closet baker, turned adventurer, doesn't know anything about vampires. Right?
Right.
Why would he? Right? Grew up in the city. You maybe heard the story. Doesn't really read books.
Right. Well, and
Yeah,
fundamentally, I think 5e vampires might even have reflections. I don't remember, but they left so much detail out of the vampire mythos and such that it's possible reflections are back now, right? So even your metagaming
yeah,
could be wrong in that game world, depending on what they've done with the rules.
yeah, absolutely. So, I've got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Uh, is it avoidable?
No, it's really not. And we're going to kind of come around toward the end as to why I think it's not. And actually, I'm going to wind up advocating for metagaming just a little bit too. If you look at the history of the game, the fact that it is a game definitely plays into the zeitgeist of how it was made.
Sure. So, I guess my perspective is not always, but you should try. Right? But
Yes.
like you said, it is a game. You throw out a little quote from someone who I know that you love and you're a huge fan of. Matthew Mercer was asked this question,
Hmm.
and he said, this was on Twitter in like 2016, that not all metagaming is bad, and many times it's unintentional. Just respectfully point it out and ask to be mindful. Pretty good advice.
Very good advice. And in fact, I'm going to wind up arguing that some of it's good here in just a minute, I'm sure. But and also for all the wonderful, lovely Critical Role fans out there, you do you. I have nothing against the show. Please don't hate on me because I'm getting called out for Mr. Mercer here. But in
I'm a
general,
huge fan, for the record,
yeah,
and
he
it's
is. He
something that
super
we
is.
have debates about,
Well,
but we
and
won't go
I
there
might have
today.
actually wound up being a bigger fan if Jerry wasn't such a big fan. You know, you kind of don't want to be the
Yeah.
Sally come lately to somebody's other cool thing, if that makes sense.
Sure, sure. Hey, maybe that's a podcast in itself. We can argue the merits of Critical Role.
Oh, don't even go there. I mean, seriously, people will burn down my house. I'm not into
Yeah.
that.
Oh, I'll be the first one there with the torch. I'll show them where to live.
Right? You egging them on.
Come on, guys. No, no violence.
So one of the things that I love to do is crack open this wonderful library.
Hmm.
Um, so I did some digging. I did a lot of digging in prep for this week's conversation, and I couldn't find much. First of all, I knew it was in the 30 DMG,
Hmm.
3E, and I'm going to read that in just a second. So I expected it to be in 5, and it's not. And I was super shocked. So then I thought, well, I'm going to pull open some of the more narrativist authors' works and go find a quote from them. So I looked at Robin Laws. I looked at Monty Cook. I looked at Kevin Simbita. No, none of them mention it in those terms at all. They just don't even acknowledge that it's a thing. And it's weird because, like I said, prior editions, it was a thing. It was called out. But I think you're going to see here that they take different stances on it, even the official products. So let's just dive right in. Um, in the first edition, DMG, under a section called the game, just sort of skipping over a lot, it basically says this game is not a simulationist game. It's a amusing and diverting pastime, something which can fill a few hours or consume endless days as a participant's desire, but in no case something to be taken too seriously. For fun, excitement, captivating fantasy, AD&D is unsurpassed. A realistic simulation of things from the realm of make believe, or even a reflection of medieval ancient warfare, culture, or society, it can be deemed only a dismal failure. The key evidence for that, I think, is the 10-foot pole.
Okay.
So if you haven't been around for that era of gaming, there were
Mhm.
puddles of acid in dungeons, for example, would just kill you. You're just dead because you touched it. Uh, Spheres of annihilation were more common. Bullets would roam dungeons. These things sort of exist now, but there's a lot more saving throws and such that you're likely to succeed against. to protect you from these decisions, from these false decisions. Excuse me. Save or die poisons were absolutely a thing. Just like you don't have a character anymore, roll a new one. And also, I want to say back then, basically every dungeon master had you start at level 1, even if the rest of the party was level 12. And good luck staying alive in that circumstance too, right?
Sure.
So
Hmm.
back then, they knew it was a game, they played it as a game, and metagaming would have been demanded, if not expected, right? Again, you don't see or hear in any of the old stories or tales the hero goes to the store and buys a 10-foot pole, right? It just isn't a thing, unless it's a lance or a spear or something,
They're
which,
Gawain and the 10-foot pole.
right? you know, never was
By
this part of
J.R.R.
the
Tolkien.
the Grail quest. It was like, oh, first, sire, we must get the 10-foot pole, and nobody got clobbered by the gelatinous cube either.
Hmm.
So, um, although I do think gelatinous cubes are a wonderful way to explain how dungeons stay clean. But
Sure.
anyway,
Dungeon Roombas.
right? The original
Gelatinous
Roomba.
Roombas.
Boy, somebody
Yeah.
should have patented that. Boy, they could have made a mint.
Hmm.
All right,
I don't know
so
about that one.
I didn't see anything in second edition. If it's in there and I
Hmm.
missed it, let me know in the comments. But I didn't see it. But they specifically talk about metagame thinking here in third edition. This is third edition DMG. Metagaming thinking. Metagame thinking says, I figure there'll be a lever on the other side of this pit that deactivates the trap, a player says to the others, because the DM would never create a trap that we couldn't deactivate somehow. That's an example of metagame thinking. Anytime the players base their characters' actions on logic that depends on the fact that they're playing a game, they're using metagame thinking. This should always be discouraged because it detracts from real role playing and spoils the suspension of disbelief. It goes on to say, surprise your players by foiling metagame thinking. Suppose there is a lever on the other side of the pit, for example, but it's rusted and useless. Keep your players on their toes and don't let them second guess you. Tell them to think in terms of the game world, not in terms of you as the DM. In the game world, someone made the trap in the dungeon for a purpose. Figure out the reasons for what they have done, and the PCs will need to do the same. In short, when possible, you should encourage the players to employ in game logic. Confronted with the situation given above, an appropriate response from a clever character is I figure there'll be a lever on the other side of the pit that deactivates the trap because the gnomes who constructed the trap must have a means to deactivate it. In fact, this is wonderful. It shows smart thinking as well as respect for the verisimilitude of the game world. They kind of went all the way around the world on that one, didn't they?
Yeah, and kind of is the end effect the same,
Mm-hmm.
right?
It
We
really
disable
is.
trap because the gnomes built it and they would need a way to disable it, or hey, we just know how this works, right?
Right.
Yeah. I
I,
still think it's good advice, but just a poor example. So shame on you, 3E DMG.
all right. So here we have now the 4E DMG. And
The
ladies and
what?
gentlemen, I am
Wait,
breaking
the
out the fourth edition. You
I
heard it
thought
here
we skipped
first.
4.
I
Then
really
went
did.
straight to 5.
I mean,
No?
it's in my library, but I hear some people played it. Maybe actually, I don't know. People that learned D&D through fourth edition loved it.
Mhm.
Um, they just
Hmm.
didn't know what the game used to be, I think. But anyway, here we got metagame thinking. Players will get the best enjoyment when they preserve the willing suspension of disbelief. Role playing games' premise is that it is an experience of fictional people in a fictional world. Metagame thinking means thinking about the game as a game. It's like a character in the movie knowing he's in a movie and acting accordingly. This dragon must be a few levels higher than we are, a player might say. The DM wouldn't throw such a tough monster at us. Or, you might hear, the read aloud text spent a lot of time on that door. Let's search it again. Discourage this by giving players a gentle verbal reminder. But what do your characters think? Or you could curb metagame thinking by asking for perception checks when there's nothing to see, or setting up an encounter that is much higher level than the characters are, just make sure to give them a way to avoid it or retreat.
Hmm. Okay. So that specific example that they used, it was in the read aloud text. Therefore, it must be, a part of the solution or important. It must have some meaning.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, like I am completely guilty of that. Like there are some puzzles that come. Oh, I think we mentioned the last episode actually, Tomb of Annihilation. Some puzzles were completely nonsensical. You could not figure them out without that read aloud text, right?
Right.
Interesting. So in I guess storytelling, there's actually a term for that, and it's Chekhov's gun. Are you familiar with the phrase?
I am. Yes.
Yeah.
Basically.
So basically, like if you're writing a story,
Mhm.
don't hang a gun on the wall unless you're going to shoot it in the next scene, right? If you're not going to use it,
Right.
it shouldn't be there.
Right.
So kind of the same thing, right? Like players are anticipating that Chekhov's gun, right? The DM said this thing, therefore it is important. So yeah, and so they immediately examine it, even though it wouldn't be reasonable for the character to do so in the situation. There would have been, maybe other things to check out, or other thoughts would have to cross their minds before they went to, that, you know, uh, Chekhov's gun there.
Yes.
So, and interestingly enough, um, I see this in storytelling so much. This and just general foreshadowing that my wife thinks that I'm psychic. We'll be watching a
Okay.
TV show or a movie, and uh, I mean, usually stuff with bad writing, but not always, right?
Yeah.
And then I'll see the clues, and I'll see the those breadcrumbs that are put out there in front of you, and I'll guess, the plot or a major plot point. And if I think about it, it's probably pretty annoying. But yeah, I mean, it's someone who writes and tells stories. Like I know these tricks,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So she thinks I'm somehow clairvoyant or something, which is not true.
No,
So
it's just intuition honed through the practice of your craft.
exactly. Hmm.
Yeah, I'm getting that way with internet arguments. I paused a video the other day right after the pitch, and I said, he's going to say this, this, and this. And Kelly's like, what? I'm like, let's watch and see. And he sure did.
That's
Yep.
funny.
So it does make sense then that your players, especially players who've been playing a game like Dungeons and Dragons for a long time, would develop some of these same habits as well, right? Some ability to read the room or read the description of the room. And we
Hmm.
talked in agency last time about how tone or lack of tone, how role playing or lack of role playing can greatly inform your players in an unconscious way, mostly unconscious way anyway, about what is and is not important in the room. And I think the box text definitely calls out everything that's important in the room, um, depending on how the DM reads it. Now, I rarely read it word for word,
Hmm.
so that's both good and bad, but I kind of do that to sort of soften the blow of that a little bit, but still, it's there.
Interesting. I don't usually run like other people's adventures, so I just look at my bullet points. But even still, like yeah, reading the verbose description uh, could maybe maybe give too much, right? Is that a tactic you could use? Like hold some information back unless it's asked about.
You could,
So,
yes, especially if the characters have a history of not being very observant, or if they're in a
mhm.
hurry, or there's some other reason why they wouldn't notice. Absolutely.
Hmm. Interesting.
It goes back to that sort of suspension of disbelief thing. But I want to get back to that in a second because that's kind of a topic all in and of itself.
Hmm.
So I had a little idea when putting this together. I challenged Jerry to collect a few scenarios where we could play a little game of is it metagaming if? Um, so I'll kick things off. I think some of these are kind of fun. And I'm just going to say, is it metagaming if blah, 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 and just, Jerry, give me your gut reaction and then maybe
Come on,
dive
Bob.
into it a
You
little bit.
you didn't tell me there was going to be a quiz.
Oh, there's
I
going to be a
didn't
quiz. No,
I didn't
there's
study.
these are actually kind of set up and picked. Just there's not really a right answer.
Yeah.
Because I want us to think through the topic, and I want people listening to think through it as well. So hopefully this is a success. But number one, is it metagaming if you adapt your strategy because the DM breaks out the maps or the minis?
I mean, I feel like the right answer is yes, right? Um, Especially for kind of, my play style, right? When I'm DMing and I'm not, at some place that utilizes like digital resources where I've planned things out ahead. Like I don't even like to use a map or minis, right? So if a map comes out, then yeah, anticipate combat. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree with that take. It's one of the things that I'll coach DMs on pretty early. They'll say, "Why do my players always fight the monster?" Question one: Did you put a mini on the map?
Yeah. Did you give
Because
them a target?
that could be why, right? When
Yeah,
you're a hammer, every problem's a nail,
absolutely. All right, I've got one for you.
right?
Are out of character so is it metagaming if characters have conversations out of character? So I'm thinking about here is during a combat sequence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, you're in this, high pace, high tension scenario, and the players are all out of character, having elaborate conversations about plans and what they're going to do, how things should be done. Is that metagaming?
Yes, it is. By the definition that we're working with, you're
Hmm.
talking about game things that the characters themselves would not have any way to even measure or communicate about, right? I don't know if you've seriously injured yourself, um,
Hmm.
but especially in that moment, you may not know how bad it is, right?
Yeah, the adrenaline's pumping.
Right,
How you doing over there? I'm about 7 hit points. It's not your
right,
thoughts during a fight, right? Like,
right. You don't have an exact membership of measurement of how far away from death you are. Um,
right.
and depending on your personality, you're either going to way overblow the problem or way understate it. Especially most of the quote unquote tough guys that we would see in a D&D
Yeah,
barbarian, he's not going to admit that he's down 7 hit points, right?
right, right. It's just, another walk in the park for me. Yeah, so
Right.
interesting enough, I bring up I overheard a conversation later. I had a conversation with this DM at RPG Dungeons. His name's Michael, and he has an interesting rule that apparently was taken from other systems. Like it may have been in older editions of D&D or in Pathfinder, but it's not really in Fifth Edition. And yeah, he said, at the table during combat, um, in character conversations, 6 words is a free action, assuming it's quick. More than that will actually take your action,
Yeah.
right? And is saying that otherwise people try to work out a 4 hour strategy back and
Right.
forth in a half a second they have to talk,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It
That
takes a lot of the, I guess, the real chaos out of what a knockout drag out fight would actually be.
it does, and it lets the players sort of strategize and synergize with their skills. That's a third edition concept because free actions don't exist anymore. But yeah,
Mm.
old editions used to say as an optional rule, if you say it, your character says it. So you start babbling about words that don't have meaning in the game world, and you're crazy.
So what do you think of that as a rule? It's not something that I've seen you play at your table.
No, I don't. And the reason that I don't is because if you take the thought all the way around the globe, yes, the players know more about the characters than the characters could probably express in game terms in the world. However, the characters are actually there and they can see a lot more of what's going on and they know how the other characters fight if they fought with them at all. So they would be more intuitive than the players can be in the same situation. So I allow it,
Sure, I mean
just kind of
that's
offsetting that.
yeah, that makes sense, right? Like you are maybe you're not trained professional soldiers, but you've been, traveling the world, murdering things together for weeks, months, years, right? Like, hey, do that thing where shoot lightning at them, you know, like that makes perfect sense.
Right?
But
Mandalorian spoiler,
consequently,
right? Where he says, "Do the
yeah,
magic hand thing."
yeah, yeah. Consequently, uh, I mean that can it can drag out combat, right?
It
Combat's
really
already
can.
long enough, but yeah.
And I've seen
So
players like go deep into the metagame of a situation that just frankly does not matter. I mean, you know, they're going into this 9 levels of strategy on a guy who has 3 hit points left. They're just like, go over and breathe on him, please. But they don't know that, so they're playing it to the
sure.
hilt.
So we could take a little bit of a side topic and come back to this is in a metagaming if because I really like this. But there's I guess a YouTuber that you actually turned me on to Matt Colville,
Hmm.
and I don't think this idea is his, but he did a video where he broke down the different types of players in games, right? So the question of is it okay to metagame? I mean, part of it depends on your group and the types of players that are at your table.
It does.
So
It
I
very
think
much
a
does.
couple of these player types were stuff like tactician or storyteller, method actor, casual player. There's just a huge list.
Right.
Um, but those different types of players would have different thoughts and feelings on that, right? So for example, the tactician, right? They would definitely want to plan things out, do the smart move next,
Yes.
Um, whereas maybe a casual player was like, why are we talking about this? Why aren't we just killing things?
Right. And especially if you're a fifth edition gamer, right? Fifth edition sort of has this extra wrinkle to it in that it is intended to be all things to everyone. So the fourth
Hmm.
edition kind of fractured the game world. Pathfinder hopped on the opportunity, took 3E and ran with it. So
Hmm.
in 5E, they said, okay, we need to bring the old school gamers back. We need to bring the fourth E gamers back. We need to steal some of those Pathfinder gamers back. How can we make a system that does all of these things? The downside to that is you're going to have players coming out of a system mastery laden Pathfinder game into 5e, maybe sitting down at the same table as somebody who's just now picking up the game in 5th edition. So you've got to really sort of get a sense of what each player likes and be tolerant because of the big tent concept that 5e is trying to do.
Sure. It's a tall order making everyone happy, right?
Yeah. Well, um, one of the things I say about 5e pretty regularly is it's good enough. Right? It's not the best I've ever played, but it is good enough, and it's good enough I think for just about everybody, which
Sure.
probably makes it the best if I'm honest. But
All right. Uh, whose turn is it for the metagaming
I
questions?
think me. So
Okay.
is it metagaming if you search for a secret door because of a blank spot on the maps?
Oh, absolutely. And I know for a fact that I've been in a group that did this in Tomb of Annihilation, actually, that you ran. And I took issue with it, but it didn't bother me enough that I even said anything about it. But I think you had like Fog of War or something on a digital map, and how it was cut, you could kind of see there's something behind the wall.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, definitely metagaming.
Now,
Um,
I just want to say for my audience's sake that Jerry has played more than Tomb of Annihilation at my table. Um,
it's
that game
true.
gave him PTSD, and he has yet to seek treatment for it. So that's what's going on
Yeah,
here.
I if you know anyone, you can maybe drop a comment.
Right? It's a
Hit
little
us up at
cottage industry right
rethinkgaming.com.
there.
Yeah, were you victimized by Tomb of Annihilation?
So I'm going to disagree. It's not. And again, this kind of goes back to that same sort of thing. If you're in a building and you've been into
Hmm.
a couple of different rooms, especially as a professional dungeoneer, and let's face it, every player character has been trained by someone. I mean, give or take the meta, but has been trained to go into dungeons and get treasure. They know this craft. That's why they have saving throws. That's why they have these weird sort of niche spells that are just designed for Dungeoneers, you're going to notice if there's 10 foot of missing space in between the rooms. Does that make sense?
Um, Depending, right? You could notice that. I'll give you that. You absolutely could notice that. In many situations. I,
No.
I'll
I mean,
buy
your
it.
characters
I'll
aren't
let
going to
you get away with that
necessarily
one.
know which wall to search, as, metagaming might inform that a little better, but so.
Mm.
All right, what have you got?
I'm still chewing that one up in my head here.
Oh, go ahead. I don't mean to rush
Yeah,
us.
no, yeah, no, nothing else to say to it. But I'm not 100% convinced on that one. But I think I'll let it go. All right. Is it metagaming if you bend the rules and base a character, base creating a character on the campaign setting?
Ooh, yes, I guess it has to be, right? I feel terrible saying yes because I can just feel the pitchforks being sharpened. But yeah, I mean, what are the chances that Joe Hero is just perfectly cut out for this problem that falls in his lap, right? How likely is that to actually come to be?
Sure. I mean, I'm thinking like Curse of Strahd without a paladin. You
Right.
know, like you wouldn't do it, or even group composition, right? That's a big thing. It's actually something that I'm completely against, right? If you're forming a new group, it's
Yeah.
like, well, we need our caster, we need our whatever. I'm like, no, throw it out the window. Pick your character, and we'll work with whatever comes out, right? We're
Right.
just people that got together. Consequently, in Rime of the Frost Maiden, which we're playing right now, we have two barbarians in the group. Why? I mean, we have one really good barbarian and one that's okay. Kidding, but
In defense of the OK Barbarian, he is on the podcast. No, wait, I mean, he is a new player. Um,
yeah,
yeah,
no,
I've
no,
never
I'm
seen
kidding.
a
But yeah, so
barbarian with such high int as Zeno has.
yeah,
Okay.
he's a bright guy. Um, he just knows he knows when to kick butt is
That's right.
his strength there. Um, but yeah, no, like that's kind of the same thing there, right? The party composition is metagaming technically.
Hmm.
If you think about that at all, and a lot of people I think would argue that it would be stupid not to do that, right? But maybe that kind of puts a point on the conversation, right? Like it's okay for your characters to be stupid, right?
Yeah.
They're not omniscient, you know. Um, and you
Yeah.
said that these characters have all been trained in dungeons, but
Mhm.
unlike the players, they haven't lived several lives as dungeoneers, if that makes sense.
That is true.
Yeah.
No, I just saw a YouTube video the other day that was advocating for making suboptimal characters. It was really
Oh
funny
yeah.
because she framed it as, I know the old school people are going to come after me for this one. And I actually left a comment on there. I said, no, the old school people used to roll for stats in order. We
Hmm.
know suboptimal. We've done that.
Yeah, and it
But
was kind of you chose your class afterwards as well, right? So you roll your
right.
stats and like, I guess this is a wizard, you know.
Yeah.
Not really what I wanted to play,
It's like I
but
got a 5 strength. I guess I'm not going to be that paladin after all.
to name a system that I love that you haven't had a chance to play yet. I know Merc Borg, like
Oh, yeah.
character creation, you literally roll everything. Um, you don't decide on your class even. You can, but there's the official way to do it in the book is you roll for it, right? So
Right.
you roll your stats and you roll your class. They may not match up very well, you know. Um, but there's some, I guess, mechanics in the system that help that out a bit. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
All right. So, next up, is it metagaming if you communicate your exact number of hit points?
Uh, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. We kind of mentioned earlier,
it did.
um, but it's not something that. even me as a player, I like to even do that, right? Like I'll be kind of a pain about that to their players, to kind of keep them in line there, right? Like, how many hit points do you have? I'm like, I don't know. I'm not feeling too great though.
Yeah, yeah. It's I saw on Facebook there was a meme, and it's like, no table talk. Okay, okay. So on a scale of 1 to 74, I feel like about a 63.
Yeah, that's good.
All right, I have one last one. Is it
Okay.
metagaming if you read the monster manual?
I mean, it's a really good book. It's got great art in it and great stories about these things. I'm gonna say it's not metagaming to read the monster manual, but it is metagaming to take that knowledge to the table if your character would not, you know, reasonably have that knowledge. How's that
That's
for
right.
a non-answer?
No, it's absolutely right. I actually kicked a player out of the group. Well, got into an argument that wound up with the player leaving the group over that
Okay.
exact same problem, right? Um,
Mm.
he felt like the dragon should be dead because he was counting the hit points. And I said, nope, still alive. And he busts out the book in front of me and shows me the hit points of the dragon,
That's a dragon. They're not all the same.
right?
Jeremy, whatever his name was.
Well, that guy was named
That's a
Sean.
made-up name.
Somehow I wound
Yeah.
up still naming my son Sean after that terrible player. So go figure.
Ah, we should all name our children after terrible D&D players.
No, I wouldn't go that far.
No, only your firstborn.
Okay,
No.
fair. Which may explain why he has no interest in D&D. I'm here to tell you, dads, raise them right. Don't do like I did.
Mhm.
My kids, no, they're not into their old man's hobby at all. So I definitely screwed that up.
It could be like me, right? Like I was not into the stuff my dad was into at all. It's just that my younger brother was, right? So specifically like woodworking. I was in the garage with my dad all the time. I
Mm-hmm.
saw everything happen. I wasn't super engaged, but I picked up a lot of information. And then many years later, I'm like, hey, this is pretty great. Let's cut wood into smaller pieces of wood. Yay. And actually picked it up as a hobby myself, right? So there's still hope. That's what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
um, maybe after your boys discover girls and then realize that maybe that's not all it cracked out to be. I should get a different hobby. Maybe then they'll turn to D&D.
Well, we can hope. I'll be there for them when they do.
There you go. That's all you can really do as a father, right?
Right.
There you go. Parenting advice on D&D podcast or
That's
gaming
right.
podcast. I mean, who would have thought, right?
Well, one of the things we touched on this just a little bit earlier, and I kind of wanted to bring us back around to the point. I don't think metagaming is actually the problem. Um, because in a lot of ways, as Mr. Mercer said, it can be a good thing, and I want to dive into that a little bit too. But what I think the actual problem, the actual risk here, is suspension of disbelief. And
Okay.
while pulling together some books for tonight's discussion, I did find a really cool passage in the old Star Trek role playing game. This is Last Unicorn stuff, and man, I wish that they had had a longer path to run toward this content because they did a pretty good job at it, even though it wasn't that popular. These books are
Hmm.
super expensive these days, too, so my collection will never be complete. But suspension of disbelief says one of the most important actions you can take to enjoy the game is to suspend your disbelief. Your character may search for reasons why that NPC can fly when gravity shouldn't allow such a thing. But you, as the player, must be willing to accept that the being is indeed flying and that it can do so. Perhaps you won't discover why it is able to fly, but if you insist on hearing strictly to real world science, you'll ruin your own and everyone else's enjoyment. The being's body chemistry may alter its weight, or it may possess some advanced technology that allows its flight. The point is, you need to allow the narrator some leeway to depart from what is known as true. Besides, if you're playing Star Trek, you've already accepted transporter beams, warp drives, and impassive guys with pointed ears as normal. Forget the science and get on with the game. I think the same is true for some degree of metagaming concepts, right?
Hmm.
If you are trying to win D&D, if you're trying to break the game, the end result of that break is going to be pulling people out of their suspension of disbelief. Right? You are going to be taking away from the actual point of the evening's engagement, which is to have a good time playing the game.
Yeah, so I don't see it as breaking the game, right? I feel like if you give someone a set of rules, like we kind of have this natural inclination to want to win, right? So I think you're playing the game, in the you know, in technically the best way that it can be played, but you're probably breaking the experience,
Yeah,
right?
fair.
Um, if you let it go, if you suspend disbelief, you can have a much better time, right? And kind of to go back to your Star Trek quote there, I was kind of thinking on that. Like, uh, there's some similarities here. Like Vulcans are totally space elves, right?
Yes.
That's all that is, right? It was Lord of the Rings is popular. We should have these elves in space,
Yeah,
and
that's
that's kind
totally
of
fair.
right where the Vulcans came from. And also just
Dispassionate, longer lived, more capable. Yeah,
yeah, a random quote that I'm a little bit disappointed they didn't throw out there, right? Is Arthur C. Clarke, who said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic,
right?
right? So that would have put a fine point on that as well.
It would have.
Yeah,
So
better
as I
write the
was
book.
driving down the suspension of disbelief topic, I
Hmm.
started to go down the rabbit hole, and I thought, well, maybe that could be a conversation all in and of itself. But
Hmm.
I picked up a TED talk from a man named Tom Bartlett who was talking about it in drama. But he summed it up as the brain's best guess at what's going on as long as the behavior is truthful to the imaginary circumstances. So what he was trying to explain was you don't normally take in all the details of a particular event that's happening in front of you. Your brain kind of filters that out for you and you just sort of process the gist of it. And if you're going along with a story, you're maybe not thinking about the parts that don't make as much sense. Um, and that is that suspension and the suspension of disbelief. What I think
Sure.
metagaming risks is you start to focus on the weird sort of corners and angles in the D&D rules or in the dungeon's setup. Why are there no bathrooms in this dungeon? Where do people poop? Right? Um, is that fun?
It's
Maybe.
funny.
Right?
Yeah.
Is that the reason to sort of derail the night and say, well, wait a minute, we need to find the bathroom because I can't figure out how these people actually live in this place, right?
Yeah, it's another callback to Star Trek. Actually, the Next Generation. Growing up, my buddy had a nice framed print of a schematic of the Enterprise D from the Next Generation, right? And if you looked at the whole thing, it had two really interesting things. The power source was a hamster on a hamster wheel, and there was one bathroom on the entire ship.
Okay. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
So, what was the context of this talk actually from Tom Bartlett?
Hmm.
Well, what was he? What was he talking about? Was he just talking about suspending disbelief
He
and
was talking about
storytelling,
suspension of
or?
disbelief. Yeah, in theater, his key example was there was a play that
Mm-hmm.
he was doing where the vampire comes out and stabs the hero and kills him, in this big dramatic scene. And in one of the run throughs of the play, the actor playing the vampire forgot his dagger. So he just stabbed him with his thumb, right? The show must go on.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody kind of went along with it and nobody complained. And backstage, they were thinking, oh, this is going to be a thing. It wasn't a thing. And that got him thinking about, well, why was it a thing? And you asked a few people in the audience. They said, "Well, I figure he's a vampire. He's got powerful thumbs. I don't know. It didn't matter. Right? It was the same thing for the story."
Yeah. I mean, a couple of things in the theater, like unless you're sitting up close, like would you really even notice?
Hmm.
And also like the entire set, right, is objects that are moved around. They're not real things, They're not these are
Right.
like real cars or whatever, real buildings. So you have to kind of put yourself in that situation, right, mentally. Suspend disbelief. I think maybe he was telling a truth. It is how kind of like the human mind works, right? We're
Hmm.
great at filling in those gaps, and sometimes we're a little bit too good, right? So whenever
Right.
there's a tragedy or some chaotic event, like I don't know, like uh,
Like a
uh,
fish kill or something, right?
or I'm thinking like even something like something very tragic, like a shooting or something, right?
Hmm.
Um, Firsthand accounts aren't always 100% accurate,
Right.
right?
Right.
You saw something. Did you see what you thought you saw? In addition, like over time, like you tell that story several different times, and a detail gets added in, or someone asks a question, and you have
Right.
to kind of put a fact in there. You're not lying, but your brain is filling in those gaps,
That's right.
right?
They actually
Um,
tested this
hmm,
with memory and childhood, and this is a completely rabbit hole topic, but your
yeah.
siblings can implant memories into your brain, um, and you just sort of accept that what they believe is true, and your brain will create memories uh, to fill in those
Oh,
gaps.
you know what? Your parents can do the same thing.
Yeah.
We should actually have my mother on the podcast. I'm not kidding you, right? She is an amazing storyteller. She'll start spinning some yarn, and you will be completely invested. Now, I feel that finally, after my, nearly 40 trips around the sun here, like I'm onto her, right?
Right.
She doesn't fool me much anymore. So, if I'm with her, she will, start messing with someone else, like, my wife, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But, yeah, she can, she's also doing the same thing, right? So there's a joke that she tells, which I won't get into it. Um, we should probably, like I said, bring her on, have her tell it.
Yeah.
But, a joke that she tells so convincingly that I didn't know it was a joke, right? I thought it was a real story
Yeah.
about something my younger brother and I said, until I was, telling a girlfriend about this. This is before my wife, by the way. I was telling an ex girlfriend about, this thing that happened to me that I was sure that happened to me, right?
Right.
And she knew the punchline, right? And I was like, well, that's weird. It's because it was a joke, that's kind of out there. It's just my mom tells it very
Uh,
well.
okay.
Very convincing about it. So yeah,
Yeah, it reminds
but
me of the
yeah,
movie Big Fish. It's got a
ah,
similar sort of bend to it, right? The son doesn't want to go along with the dad stories. He's sick of them.
mm,
Great movie. If you haven't seen it, please go pick that up. But um,
absolutely. But kind of in that story is a little bit different, right? He didn't believe the stories, but there was some truth to them, even if the stories themselves weren't completely true.
and just
So,
to kind of bring
yeah.
it back around a little bit to tonight's topic, this is, I think, the
Mm,
biggest fault with reading the monster manual, especially in play. If you've got the stats of the monster in front of you, you know
hmm
what it should be doing. You know what it should have. You know the truth of the story. So
hmm
the story that is being told to you by the DM through the actions, the interactions of the other party, and so forth, is betrayed. It becomes hard to believe, and you're cheating yourself. I think is the point I would try to make there. Right? If you disbelieve the story, you deliberately go and find the true facts. Um, you have them, but is that better than the story itself would have been? I don't think so.
Sure. Um, yeah, if you're someone who's just a player, it doesn't do you, anything at all to be reading that book. If you have no intention of, being a dungeon master, I mean, other
Right.
than if you like to go pictures or whatever, but look those up online. But
Right.
reading, memorizing stat blocks, you're absolutely right. It would definitely take away from the game. That
Well,
being said, as a storyteller and as a dungeon master, I'm a liar. I only briefly glance at those stats for like inspiration. To be
right.
completely honest with you,
Yeah.
um, yeah,
Yeah, I will say Fantasy
Um,
Grounds has kept me a lot more mechanically honest than I used to be.
sure.
But yeah, point well taken there.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, so going back to Mr. Mercer's comment and some other comments that we've made, one of the things that I think I want my audience to sort of keep in mind is that um, metagaming is bad, bad metagaming, except it's not. Um, like anything, if it takes away your suspension of disbelief, takes you out of the game, makes somebody unhappy, that's too far. But in general, you are playing a game. And it does have some setting conceits, some sort of default decisions that have been made that you're expected to go along with in a metagaming sense. You understand what I mean?
I am buying what you're selling.
So, like, if the boots of Elvenkind are found in a chest, those go to the rogue, right? Those always go to the rogue. Why wouldn't they go to the rogue? The cleric can wear them and could put them to good use. But that's not the game that we're playing, right? The rogue is the sneaky quiet one. If the cleric suddenly becomes the sneaky quiet one, what's the rogue to do, right? He can't heal. He can't turn undead. He can sneak attack all day long, but that's another topic.
Sure.
So,
Well, the only time I would disagree with that, and it would make sense and actually add something interesting to the story, is if there's an elf in the party. It's
right,
like, hey, that's an item of my people, you know,
right,
going
fair,
on that
fair.
route. But yeah,
Super
generally
great point.
speaking, absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, there are many, many examples kind of like that. There's the concept of tanking. When you're a dungeon master and you're running monsters, especially a throng of them, does it make sense for you to wail on the first guy? No, you should skip that guy. I mean, if I'm a bunch of kobolds and there's a wizard in the back and I've lived in this world for more than 15 minutes, I'm going to go kill that wizard. I'm going to throw all my people at that wizard before he throws his fireball because I know what happens when wizards throw fireballs, right? That is a realistic decision that is in the game. And I'm not faulting dungeon masters who run the game that way, but most of us don't. Because you go wail on that wizard, he will die. Um, and is that
I mean,
necessarily
think
fun?
about. I mean, maybe kobolds, but think about even like a beast, right? If you have a pack of wolves, they don't go after like the alpha of a herd, right?
Right,
They nope all the way around them and go for like the oldest, the smallest, the weakest, or the very young, right? So a wizard would look like a very tasty snack
right.
to a beast, right? A little lean meat, um, maybe, but an easy kill. And dinner's
That's right.
dinner.
That's right. And how smart would they be for making that call, right? So
Yeah.
it's just something to think about. Like the game sort of has these concepts kind of built into it, and they're really more cultural than mechanical. But
Hmm.
it's metagaming through and through. It's because it is the game of Dungeons and Dragons or whatever version of the game you're playing. That is the only reason you're behaving the way you are. It's metagaming by definition, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because you're also producing a consistent sort of experience.
Okay.
So, um, once again, we do not have a guest. Dear podcast listeners, if you could have been a guest on our show, you could right now be telling everyone who's listening what cool thing you're working on. So hopefully you'll rectify that for our next one.
Or
But
how wrong we are.
or, yeah, please come disagree with me. Somebody. I mean, I don't know. Um, I did see one interesting question online from someone named Kaylin Cecil, who asked a question which I thought would be kind of neat to fold into our metagaming discussion. Um, they said, if you're the DM, can you still play as a character? I
I
thought
mean,
this was interesting.
you are playing a million other characters as the DM. You're playing the monsters. You're playing, you know, the mere gods as a dungeon master, right? Those are your
Right.
characters as well. Can you have a player character in the party? I mean, you can have an NPC riding along, absolutely. Um, but an actual player, what's the point, right?
right?
I don't know.
It
I don't
becomes
I don't see
really
why you would.
difficult to separate your knowledge from your character's knowledge when you have all of the knowledge. And also, the
Hmm.
temptation to make things go a certain way is important for NPCs, but you should not be doing that for characters that you control, right?
Hmm. And you have some vested interest in, I want to make this awesome character. I'm going to level him up. Give him magic items. And you're competing with the players who aren't on a level playing field, I guess, right?
Right.
Um, because you're controlling everything. It's a a little weird. And I actually kind of fell into this trap um, very recently. I ran a game that was like I had scheduled content, but not everyone showed up, so I had to do like a complete improv game. It went
Mm.
really well, but I actually just took a line out of someone's backstory, right? Uh, and this character had this mentor that betrayed him, and so I had the mentor ride along as an NPC with the party. And the problem with that is the guy kept asking his mentor, "What would you do? What would you do?" Um, so I once that got a little bit annoying, I just separate him from the party like you do.
Mm.
So yeah,
Yeah,
interesting
I
question.
think I think the answer is no. Don't do that because of metagaming, right?
Hmm.
Because it's super super hard to avoid, and you have all the power. So anyway, I just thought that was an interesting one for tonight.
Yeah. All right. So I think we're done here for tonight. So everyone who's listening, don't forget to become a member on Patreon. Take advantage of more great content and come join the conversation on Discord. And of course, if you have anything interesting to say, you're welcome to join us on the podcast. And you can find links to all of our stuff at rethinkgaming.com. It was just updated last night.
And remember, think, rethink, play.